dear friend, our brother, Alex Krainer, is here with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Good to be with you again.
Alex, we had a lot, since last time we talked. Donald Trump just 2 days ago, he announced, he called it Project Freedom in the Strait of Hormuz. He wanted to open up the Strait of Hormuz after that. Remember what has happened with Europeans. He wanted Europeans to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Then he decided to do it by himself and the United States alone doing that. And the project, after 24 hours, he said that it was concluded and there was no achievement out of that operation, Project Freedom. And then he announced that Axios reported on a framework of talk, which was mentioned by Iranian part. They said is a wish list of the Trump administration. And here is what Marco Rubio said yesterday.
Trump has said, and the facts clearly bear out, the United States of America holds all the cards. There is no scenario here in which if they decide to join a ladder of escalation, they wind up getting the last say. But our preference is for these straits to be opened to the way they're supposed to be opened, back to the way it was. Anyone can use it, no mines in the water, nobody paying tolls. That's what we have to get back to, and that's the goal here.
Yeah. What are those cards that he's talking about, and your understanding of what's going on?
Well, I would just challenge your statement that there was no achievement when obviously it was a glorious victory for the Trump administration, and that's what they're apparently running with. They created a problem, and now the victory seems to be undoing that creation. But obviously, if he's talking about the United States holding all the cards, he's not talking about a poker game. He's talking about Uno game, where the one who holds all the cards lost the game. I don't know what to say, Nima. This is like it's surreal that the administration in charge of the world's superpower, preeminent global superpower, is just making it up as they go along, inventing narratives that suits them best today, inventing a new narrative the next day, like the previous one didn't exist. It's almost like George Orwell's 1984, where they're saying we've always been at war with Eurasia, and then they just switch to we've always been at war at East Asia, and that's what's being fed to the public, and they just hope that the public will swallow the narrative every time. And there are people who will swallow the narrative every time, but I think that increasingly people are not buying it anymore, and the administration's support is melting away slowly but steadily. And unfortunately, I truly do regret that, because I think that Trump and his administration had a very, very strong popular mandate to change things, to effect a very radical course correction in the United States foreign policy. But I think that by attacking Iran on 28 February, they have jeopardized all of it. Trump, I don't know if he's still capable of winning in the midterm elections. It doesn't seem that way, but who knows? By November, things might change. But he's definitely taken enormous risks, and not only with the midterm elections, but with his whole presidency and his political legacy. And all the, not so long ago, the messages going out from that administration, switching from the free trade system to the American system of political economy. All of those elements, they seemed real, they seemed genuine. They delivered that message to the World Economic Forum in Davos in January. They reinforced that message the following month at the Munich Security Conference, and then 2 weeks later they are at war with Iran. To me, this is incomprehensible, and I think that at this moment we are so far off the charts that I can't even imagine where this will go over the coming months. But right now, it seems to me that Trump is in a very similar position as Benjamin Netanyahu, where he has to craft policy to suit his political goals, which could just, go from one pitfall to the next.
Yeah. I think the zooming out and considering what is going on in Iranian foreign minister going to Russia, talking with Vladimir Putin right now. He went yesterday. We saw him in China. And the countries are somehow finding their way to deal with the United States. And it's not about those countries deciding about it, about the United States forcing them to react. This is the reality of what's going on in the Middle East. In Ukraine, I would say finally, eventually, we're going to have it in Taiwan as well. But Alex, looking at the Trump administration, don't you think that, they have two negotiators? Let's assume that. None of them is serving, the United States. Both of them are serving Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration. It is basically, Iranians call them Zionists, sort of Israeli agents. And that's why they asked for J.D. Vance to join the talks. But the other point is he added another guy to these two, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the guy who's going to be part of the negotiations if something happens, is IDF, former IDF. How is that? I think there is no possibility for the talks between Iran and the United States. Look at what has happened yesterday. Donald Trump said we are negotiating. The framework was in Axios. Later on, we've seen the new attack on Beirut, in Dahieh, and an assassination attack. No, there is no ground for talks and negotiation. And the first line, those three steps on the part of Iran, and first of all, ending the war permanently on each and every front, which would be between Israel and Lebanon as well. Without Lebanon, Iran is not going to make any sort of deal. I can assure you that's not going to happen. And Israel is not willing to end that war. And I don't see Donald Trump being able to force them into some sort of position. How do you see the relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu?
I'm not sure, Nima. Genuinely, I'm curious about who is actually where is the moving principle in this whole equation? Who is moving these events? Because again, in this edition of war against Iran, we saw that the pressure to move was coming from Benjamin Netanyahu and the whole Zionist cabal in the United States. But in 2019, the pressure was coming from the British through the British administration and their ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch, which was in the summer of 2019. So the fact that the pressure to pursue the same agenda came from two different sources, to me suggests that there's probably a whole different layer of power play that's above Benjamin Netanyahu and above Donald Trump. And I suspect that Trump really didn't want this war because, maybe about 2 weeks ago, Tucker Carlson had one of his monologues in which he said that he has spoken with Donald Trump about this for the last 10 years, many times. and that his very strong impression was that he and Trump were on the same page, that Trump understood that this was a terrible idea. Trump said many times in public that this was a terrible idea, that it shouldn't be done. And how he ended up doing it is very difficult for me to demystify to myself. So it seems to me that what we're dealing with is again that conflict between two systems of governance, and I think that it's escalating very rapidly because the Western centers of powers, which are one side on the one side of this conflict's fault line, are probably in a panic. You know, we recently had a major battle in Mali where a contingent of about 12,000 jihadists tried to overthrow the Mali government. Very probably it was France that instigated that conflict. Thankfully, it didn't succeed, thanks to Russian support of the Mali government, and they ended up, I think, destroying about 2,000 of these jihadi terrorists. We also see an escalation of conflict between the populations and their governments in the United States, in Western Europe. We see that the British just last month formalized a new military alliance called the Joint Expeditionary Force, which groups 10 northern European navies. With obviously it's being created. This Joint Expeditionary Force is being formed to confront Russia, right? And they're saying that, you know, we need to bring back the focus from the Middle East to Russia again. The headquarters of the Joint Expeditionary Force is in London, and the top commander is a British military Brigadier General Tom Bateman. We see that in the European countries, you know, the governments are all sitting on thin ice. There's a likelihood of social uprisings, I wouldn't say overthrows of the government, but like in Romania, the people are forcing they forced the fall of the government, and they want Călin Georgescu back in power. Well, back in power, he never was in power because the election was overruled by courts. But it seems to me that all these conflicts make part of the same big war, and that the other side, the Western centers of powers, are so panicked that they're not even choosing methods anymore. They're going with outright terrorism, with sabotage, with escalation of existing conflicts. And now we see a new attempt to create a pandemic crisis, a public health crisis with this whole hantavirus outbreak, which, if you follow the news, that this just started about a month ago, but now it's, oh no, you know, it went to Switzerland, it went to the Netherlands, it went to Singapore. We don't know who carries the virus. We need to go with contact tracing. Maybe we're going to need the whole, you know, social distancing and masking and lockdowns and everything. And so I think we're in a phase where the world is rapidly entering a perfect storm of converging crises, which are not just geopolitical, they're also internal crises of the Western world. And that obviously creates political pressures on governments. And, you know, what happens with Starmer's facing election now in a few days, or maybe today? I forget, maybe it's today or tomorrow. Merz, Emmanuel Macron, they're all extremely unpopular. AfD in Germany is rising in the polls. it seems that everything is so off the charts that it's very difficult to see how the situation evolves. And then next week, Trump is going to China. I don't know what might happen there, but I suspect that the Chinese might force him to back down against Iran, because the Chinese have started to take increasingly a hard line, which they never did up until now. But now they realize that this conflict, this war, is ultimately aimed at them, and that they have to respond. They can't just sit back, issue these very ambivalent statements, and remain passive. And we see that they are getting active, and that they are now much more aggressively responding to American tit with their own tat.
Yeah. We've seen that Chinese government said to the refineries in China, don't care about the US sanctions on Iranian oil, and you can go ahead, and we're supporting you here. This is the first time, as you mentioned, China is moving, and we've seen the pictures how the Iranian foreign minister and Chinese foreign minister, they're hugging, and the way that they're approaching each other. It reminds me of Vladimir Putin and Xi hugging each other in, you remember when, Putin went to China. This is the new era, I think, for the United States. They forced all of these countries, I particularly, I'm talking about China, Russia, and Iran, all together. They know that if they want to survive, they have to stay together. There is no way for them, for none of them, in my opinion, to act, single-handedly. That's why all of them are coming together. And how do you see the way that, they're trying to go against the United States, but they don't want to be that aggressive against the United States? They want to show the United States how they would react.
Well, I believe that this is the reason for this is that the preference, particularly for Russians, the preference is to bring the United States into multipolar war, because they realize that United States is not a monolith. At the moment, it seems that the neocon faction and the pro-Zionist factions have taken control of the U.S. foreign policy. But there are also factions in the U.S. Public sphere that do want to get along with the rest of the world, trade with the rest of the world, be at peace, reduce the military budgets, reindustrialize the nation, and so forth. And that they are in a certain conflict also with their former allies in Europe. So, if they resist the impulse to antagonize the United States too much, they can allow these alliances to weaken further and maybe bring the United States on board, which would be extremely important. If they antagonize the United States, they might push them back into the old alliances, and then you have again a risk of a world war between the United West against Russia, particularly. That's going to be the first target for sure, and this is why the British are furiously working their secret diplomacy and intelligence and military circles to try to achieve that. And they will certainly try to make sure that the United States is on board, because if the United States is not on board, then they are too weak to face united Russia, China, and Iran. They're too weak to face Russia alone. But with the United States, they probably feel that they have a chance, not necessarily to win in any military conflict, but to, let's say, to bleed Russia and make it weak to the point where they can effect a regime change. If they manage to effect a regime change in Russia, then they could use Russia against China, the same way they used Ukraine against Russia. And then, in that way, they eliminate two big obstacles in their quest to dominate the Eurasian continent. and then Iran remains isolated, so it can remain there isolated like Cuba or North Korea until at some point they manage to topple Iran as well, and then they take the big prize. So I think that as far as Russia and China are concerned, and Iran as well, it's important to play this with a great deal of patience and over a long time, because with time, the internal structure of Western society will collapse. It's already collapsing. We already see the bond prices tanking, interest rates going up, the prices of commodities are going up. Inflation is going to follow. There might be a food crisis that is going to impact. So that all leads to political upheaval, and in that political upheaval, these alliances are likely to splinter, and the United States might see a lot of sense in doing good, honest business with China and Russia and Iran, if that's still possible. Because, before the war started, Trump administration was discussing deals with Iran, and the Iranians were inclined to open up to US businesses coming into Iran and developing the Iranian economy and participating in that market, which is enormous, which is absolutely huge. 92 million people, and a nation that is fifth richest in terms of natural resource wealth. So it's great potential there to cooperate. So I think that we could see that the Russians have been very, very muted in criticizing Trump. The Chinese as well. They all took measures to respond to American gambits, but without necessarily embarrassing Trump too much in front of the global public.
But Donald Trump doesn't miss any sort of opportunity to, to humiliate other countries, because he said each and every time you see he's moving against Iran, he's trying to humiliate Iranians. I don't know why is he doing this, and what is the outcome? What was the outcome so far for the United States? Because the latest report, it's coming to the Washington Post, reporting on how devastating the Iranian attack was on American bases in the region. And I think as time goes by, the Trump administration would face tremendous sort of difficulties when it comes to the GCC countries. Look at what has happened in the aftermath or during this, the so-called Project Freedom. A single attack on UAE has reduced its capabilities with that two ports in Fujairah and Khor-Fakkan, and it was reduced from 5 million barrels a day to 500,000 a day. This is, we're talking about UAE that got out. They decided to get out of, OPEC plus, OPEC and OAPEC and GCC because they wanted to send more oil. This is the fragility on the part of GCC countries. And I really believe the discussions amongst these countries are getting, are elevated, and they're getting to the point that what is the point of having some sort of partnership with the United States, basically with these bases? I don't see Donald Trump has any sort of solution for that for the time being.
Trump doesn't have a solution, that's for sure. But you see, the reason I think why the other side is moving with let's call it with a light touch, is because that in the longer term that helps them. Trump is not going to be in office much longer. He has 3 years left, less than 3 years left, and somebody else will come in after him. So he is not so relevant in the longer term. But you see, for example, if the Iranians now sank an American ship, some very, very public embarrassment to the Trump administration, with hundreds of maybe thousands of sailors going to the bottom of the sea, that would cause an outrage in the United States, regardless of who has the right, who has the wrong, and it would probably draw the wrath of the American people on Iran. However, if you let them off relatively unharmed from the whole situation, the consequences will be felt in the US economy. And there's, we already see the oil prices are going up, the prices of agricultural commodities are going up, interest rates are going up, the American debt, which is absolutely enormous, is becoming more and more expensive for the government. And there's, it seems, because if you look at the American stock market, you see enormous, very unusual rises in stock prices. And that is an indication that the Federal Reserve is flooding the system with liquidity, with currency. The reason why they would do that is because their financial system is broken. And if they didn't do that, we would see, again, some kind of a Lehman Brothers moment and a financial crisis. So the consequences of this war will be felt at home in their economy. And that's going to hurt the American people. And you know who will be blamed? Trump, but also Israel and the Zionists. So in the following elections, this neocon Zionist element is going to possibly be purged from the system, and different forces might take their place. I mean, these are historical cycles. No group, no faction can hold on to power forever. So I think that this kind of a quote unquote regime change will then benefit the multipolar world. So I think that if you avoid throwing some really, really powerful punch against the United States, killing thousands of their servicemen and women, then you allow the consequences to just happen internally, and then people blame the consequences on Trump and his advisors. So the Zionist cabal, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and if people put their thinking caps on, the City of London and the British. And then, these people will lose political support, even more than they are already losing it. And the wrath of the American people will not be directed at the Iranians, at a foreign enemy, but at the enemy at home. The enemy at home obviously would prefer it that people get mad at the Iranians, at the Russians, at the Chinese, and so forth. But if you don't give them that, pretext, then the consequences will have to be digested at home. And I think that this is the longer term strategy of the Russians and the Chinese, and I think that they discuss these strategies together with the Iranians. So the Iranians are also actually fighting their side with a great deal of restraint and responsibility. And I think that this is the reason. When Donald Trump came to power last year, Sergei Karaganov said that we see it as our task now is to help the United States transition from being a global hegemon to being a normal great power with the least disruption possible. And I think that they will continue to do exactly that. And so this is why I think we see these conversations between Arakci and Putin, and then Putin calls Trump. And then Trump's whole war rhetoric kind of dissipates and splinters, and he says, okay, well, victory achieved, we can wrap up Project Freedom, and we won. And he will continue probably to antagonize the Iranians, but probably without any success. And then when Trump goes to China next week, I expect that he will get the same rap from Xi Jinping, and he will probably have to consider the downside risk of any of these aggressive policy gambits.
Alex, do you feel that from what we've seen so far, is this administration destroying its opportunities or making new opportunities for itself?
Oh, I'm sure that they're making some opportunities for themselves, but net, I would say that they have destroyed a lot more than they have created. And this colossal blunder of attacking Iran, I think, have set them back tremendously. Losing popular support is probably the worst thing you can do in exercising political power, and they have done that exactly. Not only that, but they have also lost a great deal of credit internationally. In February, before the 28th, they had, what, 16, 17 military bases in the Middle East. Now 13 or 14 of them have been completely destroyed. They had allies in the Middle East. Now all of their allies have been destabilized and might not survive much longer. I don't know what to think of that, Nima, because Trump in his first administration, he wanted to withdraw from the Middle East. He wanted to withdraw from Syria, from Afghanistan. He even wanted to withdraw troops from Germany. Well, now he's doing all that, even though that's not what he intended. But all of that is actually happening. I don't know how we came about to those developments, but we are. And we'll see what the effect of it will be. We don't know yet. I don't think it's possible to predict. We see that the Europeans are creating new military alliances. They're exercising. They're starting to board Russian naval ships. They're forcing Russia to respond. Then they respond back. They say, "Oh, the Russians are increasing their incursions into our territorial waters." Very clearly, the British are trying to open a new front against Russia as they're running out of Ukrainians, but they're not ready for that. So they need, they're planning the next war for 2029, 2030. Are they going to be ready by then? Who knows? I kind of doubt it, but I think that the people who are actually pulling the levers of powers, they don't really care whether they win wars or not. I think that they need to achieve two objectives. They need to keep Russia weak and destabilized if possible. So they have to keep Russia fighting wars continuously. And then also, the aspect that is much less discussed, but I think it's very, very real, is that they need to get rid of a lot of military-aged men in their own populations. Kind of what they did to Ukraine. They need to do that in Germany and Poland and Britain and France and so forth, because the economic crises that are going to result from all this are going to be, once in a century type crises. And if you have a lot of military-aged males who are completely disenfranchised and who blame you for what has happened to them, you might have a revolution on your hands. You might have a civil war on your hands, and then the power, quote unquote, elites, they could all end up under a guillotine or something like that. So they are very, very scared, and I think that this is why they are very aggressively ramping up attacks on their own populations. With censorship, with sanctions that completely disenfranchise individual, like your friend Colonel Jacques Beau, with planning new pandemics, with declaring 15-minute cities where everybody has to be shut in and corralled into a small local area that can be then more easily controlled, bringing about the electronic IDs, central bank digital currencies. So it's like the matrix is tightening more and more and more around people, and they're making it easier and easier to destroy people and their lives and their families and so forth. And they're doing this, and then bringing immigrants, integrating these immigrants into the police forces, on and on and on. It just isn't stopping. So these are the two great goals that they plan to achieve. Are they going to be successful? I wouldn't bet on it, Nima, because we've seen that they had several hugely important projects over the past few years. One of them was the pandemic in 2019, 2020, that failed because we're supposed to be living in the new normal forever, and we're not. So that failed. Then, Project Ukraine was meant to regime change Russia, collapse its economy, break Russia up into whatever, five entities or 27 entities, depending on who you ask. That failed. They were supposed to collapse Iran and take it over. That didn't work. And so I see that they have a lot of these very clever plans, but they're not really working out. And so I don't know if their World War III plan is going to work out to draw Russia into a big conflict between, combined West against Russia, like a World War III scenario on European continent. I don't know if that's going to succeed. I don't know if they're going to be able to take control of Iran. I don't know if they'll be able to subdue China either. I think I doubt it, because they are weaker and weaker as time goes by, and I think they're more and more panicked, which means that they're taking steps before they're ready, and it ends up blowing up in their face. Like the recent situation in Mali. They wanted to regime change Mali. That failed too. That's maybe not such a big project, but they desperately need collateral. They desperately need to take up, to reclaim their colonies, and to basically plunder their wealth, to refill their money reserves, their coffers, their credit creation capability. And it's just not working.